NBA YoungBoy has relocated to South Korea, and the life he appears to be building there is almost impossible to compare with the one people watched him live in America. This is Kentrell Gaulden, one of the most streamed rappers of his generation, somebody whose entire public story has been tied to Baton Rouge, courtrooms, house arrest, federal custody, controversy, and an almost non-stop recording schedule. Now he is thousands of miles away from all of that. Different country, different culture, different environment, and maybe most importantly, a completely different pace of life. Because what is happening with YoungBoy in South Korea does not look like somebody simply taking an extended vacation. It looks like somebody deliberately rebuilding his environment from the ground up. And once you understand everything he had to leave behind to get there, the decision starts making a lot more sense. YoungBoy's story begins about as far away from the luxury districts of Seoul as you could imagine. Born Kentrell Gaulden in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 1999, he came from circumstances where survival became part of his identity before fame ever entered the picture. Music became his way out. But unlike artists whose careers are carefully developed through years of label planning, YoungBoy moved at an almost ridiculous speed. He recorded constantly. He released constantly, and his audience grew with practically every project. The rawness was the attraction. YoungBoy wasn't presenting some polished version of himself designed by a marketing department. His music sounded like somebody documenting his life while it was happening. The anger was there, the relationships were there, the violence was there, the depression was there, the legal problems were there. And fans responded to that honesty with a level of loyalty that eventually turned him into one of the biggest streaming forces in American rap. His catalog became enormous. His chart presence became almost routine, and his work ethic became part of his mythology. But success never separated YoungBoy from the instability surrounding him. If anything, becoming famous sometimes seemed to magnify it. Legal cases followed him through different stages of his career. Periods of incarceration interrupted his freedom. Court restrictions limited his movement. House arrest created another form of confinement. And yet somehow, through practically all of it, the music kept coming. That is what makes South Korea such a dramatic chapter. For years, YoungBoy's life seemed defined by being unable to fully escape his environment. Even when he physically left Baton Rouge, the history followed him. His name carried baggage. His relationships carried baggage. His legal situation carried baggage. His fame carried baggage. America knew NBA YoungBoy too well for Kentrell Gaulden to ever completely disappear inside it. South Korea offered something different: distance. And that became impossible to ignore when Funny Marco traveled there in August 2026 for an episode of Open Thoughts. The location alone made the interview feel unusual. This wasn't YoungBoy sitting inside some Los Angeles mansion while another celebrity interviewer pulled up. Funny Marco had to travel internationally to reach him. And during their conversation, YoungBoy made it clear that South Korea wasn't simply somewhere he happened to be staying. He was treating it as home. When the possibility of returning to live in the United States came up, YoungBoy's answer was essentially final. He wasn't planning on it. Visiting America someday was one thing. Moving back permanently was another. And when he explained what attracted him to South Korea, his reasoning was surprisingly simple: safety, cleanliness, and being out of the way. That last part might explain more than anything else. YoungBoy has spent an enormous portion of his adult life being watched. Watched by fans, watched by police, watched by federal authorities, watched by courts, watched by blogs, watched by millions of people online. Every arrest became content. Every relationship became content. Every Instagram post became content. Every argument became content. Every legal filing became another headline. Even periods when he was physically isolated didn't give him genuine privacy, because millions of people were still watching whatever pieces of his life escaped onto the internet. Now imagine going somewhere thousands of miles away from the environment where all of that history happened. The buildings don't remind you of Baton Rouge. The streets don't carry the same associations. The people around you aren't necessarily connected to old relationships. You aren't driving through neighborhoods attached to memories that go back to childhood. For somebody trying to create psychological distance from an old life, geography can matter. And South Korea gives YoungBoy about as much geographical distance from Louisiana as he could realistically create while still living inside a major global city. But Seoul isn't some isolated retreat. That's what makes this move even more interesting. YoungBoy didn't disappear onto a private island. He moved into one of the largest, most technologically advanced metropolitan areas in the world. Seoul gives him restaurants, nightlife, fashion, entertainment, luxury housing, international transportation, and practically every convenience somebody with his level of money could want. So he can be out of the way without actually being cut off from the world. That distinction matters, because YoungBoy doesn't appear to be running away from life. He appears to be choosing a different version of it. And the contrast becomes even sharper when you look at what happened immediately before this chapter. YoungBoy had spent years dealing with legal restrictions in the United States. During his period of house arrest in Utah, even basic movement became complicated. Then came additional legal trouble, then incarceration, then release. Then suddenly, within a relatively short period, he went from living under intense restrictions to having the ability to move internationally. That kind of transition would be dramatic for anybody. For somebody whose freedom had been controlled for years, it must feel almost surreal. 1 year, somebody else determines where you can go. Another year, you're walking through Seoul deciding where you want dinner. That is an extraordinary psychological shift. And YoungBoy's comments suggest he isn't taking that freedom lightly. When somebody says there is nothing left for them somewhere, that isn't the language of a person casually experimenting with living abroad. That sounds like emotional separation. America gave YoungBoy practically everything associated with his public identity: his career, his wealth, his audience, his reputation. But it also became associated with many of the darkest chapters of his life. Arrests, violence, courtrooms, incarceration, house arrest, loss, feuds, public scrutiny, constant pressure. So South Korea represents almost the opposite. Nobody can erase what happened before, but you can choose where the next chapter happens. And YoungBoy appears to have chosen somewhere completely removed from the geography of his past. Then you start seeing glimpses of what his actual lifestyle looks like. Reports and social media sightings have placed him around some of Seoul's more affluent and culturally significant areas. Cheongdam-dong, located in Gangnam, is associated with luxury fashion, upscale restaurants, premium real estate, entertainment companies, and wealthy residents. This is the side of Seoul, where global luxury brands maintain major stores, and South Korean celebrities can move through an ecosystem specifically built around wealth. For YoungBoy, that environment fits his financial reality without requiring the same kind of celebrity circus that might follow him through Miami, Atlanta, Los Angeles, or New York. He can still live extremely well. He just doesn't have to live inside the American rap ecosystem while doing it. And then there is Hongdae. That gives you another side of the picture entirely. Hongdae is known for younger crowds, nightlife, music, fashion, restaurants, street culture, and creative energy. YoungBoy reportedly being seen around that side of Seoul with people close to him suggests he isn't simply sitting behind the walls of some luxury residence. He is experiencing the city. And that matters because it suggests this move isn't only about hiding. It is about discovering something new. Think about how unusual that experience must be for him. YoungBoy became famous extremely young. There wasn't some long period in his 20s where he could quietly travel around the world figuring out who he was. By the time most people begin experiencing that freedom, YoungBoy was already one of the most recognizable rappers in America. His life became complicated before adulthood had really started. Now, at 26, he is finally in a position where he can enter an entirely different culture and experience something resembling a reset. Different language, different food, different social expectations, different nightlife, different fashion, different attitudes towards celebrity, different rhythms of daily life, and every one of those differences creates distance between who YoungBoy was expected to be and whoever Kentrell wants to become next. But there is one problem with trying to disappear when you are NBA YoungBoy. you are still NBA YoungBoy. Fame travels. The music crossed those borders years before he did. YoungBoy has billions of streams, an enormous international audience, and one of the most recognizable faces in modern American rap. So even thousands of miles from Baton Rouge, people recognize him. Phones still come out. Pictures still circulate. Sightings still end up online. Fans still want interactions. And that creates one of the most fascinating contradictions about this entire South Korea chapter. YoungBoy went across the world looking for somewhere out of the way, but he became too famous to ever completely get out of the way. The difference is that now he may finally have more control over how close the world gets. And after everything that happened during the first 26 years of his life, that control might be exactly what he was looking for. Footage of YoungBoy moving around Seoul started circulating almost immediately, and it proved something important about his new life. You can move thousands of miles away from America. You cannot move thousands of miles away from being NBA YoungBoy. Fans still recognize him. Phones still come out. Clips still spread across social media. And according to reports circulating around his appearances, some fans have gone to extraordinary lengths just for the possibility of seeing him. One person was reportedly willing to wait outside a location associated with where YoungBoy was staying for an entire day, 24 hours, just for the possibility of seeing him. That tells you how unusual YoungBoy's level of fame really is. This isn't somebody whose celebrity disappears once he leaves Atlanta, Los Angeles, Miami, or New York. The music traveled internationally long before he did. His streaming audience is global. His face is global. His fan base is global. So even in Seoul, YoungBoy can walk into a nightclub or appear around a popular neighborhood and immediately create attention without announcing anything beforehand. And that creates what might be the biggest contradiction of his South Korean life. He wanted somewhere out of the way, but he is too famous to completely disappear. South Korea gives him distance. It gives him separation. It gives him a different environment, but it does not give him anonymity. And maybe YoungBoy doesn't actually need anonymity. Maybe what he needed was simply enough distance from the people, places, expectations, and memories connected to his American life that he could finally experience something different. Because there is a massive difference between being recognized by somebody in Seoul who loves your music and being recognized in an environment connected to years of personal history. One is fame, the other can carry baggage. And YoungBoy seems increasingly interested in removing that baggage wherever possible. But there is another obvious question surrounding an international relocation that becomes much more complicated when you're talking about somebody with YoungBoy's family situation. His children. YoungBoy is the father of a large family, and moving to another continent obviously creates logistical challenges that somebody without children would never have to consider. Funny Marco brought that subject into their conversation. YoungBoy made it clear that his children remain extremely important to him. But when the distance between South Korea and the United States came up, his response was characteristically simple. That's what they have planes for. It sounds almost ridiculous when you first hear it, but underneath that answer is the reality of what extreme wealth changes. For the average parent, living across the Pacific Ocean from family would create enormous financial and logistical barriers. International airfare is expensive. Schedules become complicated. Travel takes hours. Time zones become another problem. But YoungBoy isn't operating with the financial limitations of an average person. If he wants to pay for international flights, he can. If family members need premium travel arrangements, those arrangements can be made. If somebody needs transportation waiting at the airport, that can be arranged too. Money doesn't eliminate the emotional reality of distance, and it certainly doesn't make international parenting simple, but it removes many of the practical barriers that would make a lifestyle like this impossible for most people. That brings us to the financial foundation underneath YoungBoy's entire South Korean chapter, because none of this works without money. And YoungBoy spent almost a decade building an enormous music catalog capable of generating revenue even when he isn't standing on a stage. That is one of the most important differences between YoungBoy and artists who depend almost entirely on touring. YoungBoy created volume, an unbelievable amount of volume. Albums, mixtapes, singles, features, music videos, Projects released during periods when he couldn't tour normally. Projects released during legal trouble. Projects released while his movement was restricted. Every one of those releases became another piece of a catalog that continues being streamed whether YoungBoy is in Louisiana, Utah, California, or South Korea. That catalog creates leverage, and leverage creates options. YoungBoy doesn't necessarily have to wake up every morning wondering where the next show is. He built an audience large enough that older music can continue generating attention and revenue while he explores whatever comes next. That financial independence changes the entire meaning of his relocation. He didn't move to Seoul hoping to find himself while struggling financially. He arrived with the resources generated by one of the most successful streaming careers in modern rap. And Seoul gives somebody at that level of wealth practically everything they could want. Luxury accommodations, private transportation, high-end restaurants, designer shopping, nightlife, personal services, security, international travel connections, modern infrastructure, and neighborhoods designed around people with serious disposable income. Think about the contrast. A kid grows up navigating Baton Rouge. Years later, that same person can wake up in one of Asia's most advanced cities, get driven through Seoul, eat at world-class restaurants, shop inside luxury districts, and board an international flight whenever he decides he wants to leave. That isn't simply financial success. That's mobility. And after years when courts determined where YoungBoy could and couldn't go, mobility probably means something completely different to him now. There was a time when leaving his property required permission. Now he can cross oceans. There was a time when his geographical boundaries were determined by legal paperwork. Now he can decide which country he wants to wake up in. That contrast might be more valuable to YoungBoy than any designer purchase he can make in Gangnam. Freedom hits differently when you have experienced the opposite. But then the funny Marco conversation revealed something that completely changed the tone of this entire story. Because underneath the money, the international travel, the nightlife, the luxury neighborhoods, and the excitement surrounding YoungBoy's new life was something much more serious: his health. YoungBoy revealed that a doctor had found an issue involving the left side of his heart, and according to YoungBoy's own account, he learned about the problem while he was still performing. He didn't immediately stop. He didn't announce it publicly. He didn't turn it into a dramatic social media moment. He kept going, show after show, city after city, night after night. That detail tells you almost everything about the mentality YoungBoy has carried throughout his career. Pain meant keep going. Legal trouble meant keep going. House arrest meant keep going. Prison meant eventually come back and keep going. Mental pressure meant record more music. And apparently even being told something was wrong with his heart wasn't enough to immediately shut that mentality down. He kept performing. That might sound tough. It might even sound admirable to somebody looking at it purely through the lens of work ethic. But there comes a point where pushing through everything stops being strength. Your body has limits that ambition cannot negotiate with. And YoungBoy appears to be realizing that. During the conversation, he connected what was happening physically to the emotional quality of his music. He referred to his heart almost like it was another person. She is hurting. That is such a YoungBoy way of explaining something serious. Instead of giving some polished celebrity answer about prioritizing wellness, he turned the physical condition of his heart into an emotional explanation for his music. And suddenly, the South Korea move starts looking different. Maybe this isn't primarily a luxury story at all. Maybe the restaurants and nightlife and expensive neighborhoods are the surface. Underneath them is a 26-year-old man trying to figure out how to live after spending most of his life operating like survival required maximum intensity every single day. Because when you combine everything YoungBoy has recently been saying, a pattern begins to emerge. South Korea. No desire to permanently return to America. Only 1 or 2 more albums. Potentially one final major touring chapter. Health becoming a priority. Wanting somewhere safe. Wanting somewhere clean. Wanting somewhere out of the way. Those aren't isolated decisions. They sound like pieces of the same transition. For years, YoungBoy's objective was expansion. More songs, more albums, more streams, more success, more money. Keep going regardless of what happened. Now the objective appears to be changing. Maybe enough is finally becoming enough. And that would represent one of the biggest transformations of his entire life. Because NBA YoungBoy built his career by behaving like tomorrow was never guaranteed. Record today. Release today. Make the money today. Say what you feel today. Survive today. That mentality can make somebody extraordinarily productive. It can also make imagining life 10 or 20 years into the future extremely difficult. Now YoungBoy appears to be thinking differently. Not simply about the next album, about the next decade, about where he wants to live, about what environment he wants around him, about how much longer he wants to perform, about his family, and most importantly about whether the lifestyle that created NBA YoungBoy is actually compatible with keeping Kentrell Gaulden healthy. That is what makes South Korea so important. The biggest luxury YoungBoy may have purchased with all those years of success isn't a home, a car, designer clothing, or first-class flights. It's the ability to choose a different life. And after spending so many years with other people deciding where he could go and what he could do, YoungBoy finally appears determined to use that freedom on his own terms. And that is what makes this chapter of YoungBoy's life so different from everything that came before it. For most of his career, slowing down never seemed like an option. There was always another project, another song, another video, another tour, another legal battle, another controversy, another reason to keep moving. But now YoungBoy is openly talking about an ending. Not necessarily the end of music forever, but the end of the lifestyle that has defined almost his entire adult life. 1 or 2 more albums, one final tour, then something different. Coming from almost any other rapper, that might sound like the kind of retirement talk artists make before returning 6 months later with another album. Coming from YoungBoy, it carries more weight because excessive output has always been one of the defining characteristics of his career. This is somebody who treated recording almost like breathing. Prison couldn't completely disconnect him from music. House arrest couldn't stop the releases. Legal cases couldn't stop them. Personal problems couldn't stop them. Even periods when his entire life seemed unstable still produced music. So when that person suddenly says music isn't his main focus anymore, you have to pay attention. Something has changed. And South Korea appears to be where YoungBoy is giving himself enough space to figure out exactly what that change means. The version of NBA YoungBoy the public became accustomed to was built around chaos. His music frequently arrived alongside another headline. An arrest, a court appearance, a relationship controversy, a social media moment, a feud, a new restriction. Then, another project would appear. That cycle became so normal that people almost stopped recognizing how abnormal it actually was. YoungBoy could be experiencing one of the most difficult periods of his personal life and still release enough music to dominate streaming platforms. Fans began expecting that pace. The industry began expecting that pace. Eventually, YoungBoy probably began expecting it from himself. But look at the images surrounding him now. Instead of courthouse footage, people are seeing Seoul. Instead of hearing primarily about another legal problem, they're hearing him discuss his future. Instead of YoungBoy talking like he has something to prove every second, they're hearing a 26-year-old man acknowledge that his health matters. Instead of another American tour announcement, they're hearing him discuss one final tour. That's a completely different energy. And the change doesn't necessarily mean YoungBoy has become somebody else. If anything, it might mean Kentrell Gaulden is finally getting an opportunity to exist without NBA YoungBoy consuming every part of his identity. That distinction becomes even more important when you look at what he may be building outside music. Reports surrounding his time in South Korea have connected YoungBoy with a digital venture called Urban Link 360. The concept reportedly centers around creating a more direct connection between artists and their audiences. And if that develops into what has been described, it would make a lot of sense as part of YoungBoy's next chapter. Because YoungBoy already possesses the hardest thing any direct-to-consumer entertainment business needs: Attention. He doesn't need somebody to introduce him to an audience. The audience already exists. Millions of people have spent years following practically every chapter of his life. They listen when he releases music. They watch when he gives interviews. They discuss his relationships. They follow his legal cases. They debate his decisions. They track his movements. That kind of attention is enormously valuable. Traditionally, artists monetize that attention through record labels, streaming platforms, touring companies, merchandise companies, social media platforms, and other intermediaries. A direct fan platform potentially changes that relationship. Instead of constantly feeding an outside platform and allowing that company to control the relationship with your audience, an artist can potentially create a space where that connection belongs more directly to them. For YoungBoy, that idea fits his career unusually well. His fan base has never behaved like a casual audience. YoungBoy fans are intensely engaged. They don't simply listen to an album and disappear. They follow the story. And YoungBoy has always given them a lot of story to follow. So imagine redirecting even a fraction of that attention into something he owns or controls more directly. Exclusive content, community features, early music access, behind-the-scenes material, direct communication, potentially merchandise or other products. Suddenly, YoungBoy doesn't need to release 5 projects every year just to remain economically connected to his audience. The relationship itself becomes part of the business. And doing that from Seoul makes the situation even more interesting. South Korea is one of the most digitally connected societies in the world. Technology is deeply integrated into everyday life. The country's entertainment ecosystem has also demonstrated how powerful highly organized fan communities can become when music, technology, merchandise, exclusive content, and direct artist engagement are brought together. YoungBoy doesn't need to become a K-pop artist or imitate the Korean entertainment industry. But being physically surrounded by an environment where technology and fan culture intersect at an extremely sophisticated level could naturally influence how he thinks about his own audience. If Urban Link 360 becomes a serious part of his business future, then South Korea might eventually be remembered as more than the place YoungBoy moved to. It could become the place where he started figuring out what comes after rap. And that question matters when you're talking about somebody considering retirement at only 26 years old. Because retirement doesn't necessarily mean doing nothing. For somebody as driven as YoungBoy, that seems almost impossible to imagine. It could simply mean redirecting the obsession. For years, the obsession was recording. Maybe now it becomes ownership, technology, business, family, health, travel, or simply experiencing parts of life that his career never gave him enough space to experience before. But there is one major practical issue underneath all of this. YoungBoy can say South Korea is home. He can feel like South Korea is home. He can decide emotionally that he never wants to permanently live in America again. But international residency doesn't operate purely on emotion. Immigration status matters. Visas matter. Government requirements matter. YoungBoy himself appeared to recognize that during his conversation with Funny Marco. That is an important distinction because some of the coverage surrounding his relocation has made the situation sound simpler than it actually is. Moving internationally is a legal process. Wealth and celebrity can make navigating that process easier because you have access to attorneys, advisors, and resources. But money doesn't automatically grant somebody permanent residency in whatever country they choose. South Korea has its own immigration rules. YoungBoy would still need to qualify for whatever status allows him to remain there under the conditions he wants, and his comments suggest that he understands that. He can say, "This is where I want my life to be," while simultaneously acknowledging, "I still have paperwork and legal requirements to handle before this becomes permanent in every formal sense." Those ideas can exist together. In fact, that might be another reason this entire chapter still feels like a transition rather than a finished destination. YoungBoy is building the next version of his life, while he is already living inside it. And despite all the retirement talk, the creative side clearly hasn't disappeared overnight. Reports of private listening sessions suggest music remains part of the picture. That makes sense. You don't spend more than a decade using music as your primary method of processing life and suddenly wake up with zero desire to create. The difference might simply be control. YoungBoy no longer seems interested in feeding the machine at the same pace. Maybe instead of releasing because people expect another project, he releases because he actually has something he wants to release. Instead of touring endlessly because touring generates enormous money, maybe he does one final run and walks away while he still has the ability to choose. Instead of allowing music to determine his entire schedule, music becomes one part of a much larger life. And when you trace YoungBoy's story from the beginning to this moment, the transformation becomes almost unbelievable. Baton Rouge, teenage recording sessions, street violence, juvenile detention, breakout records, millions of streams, legal cases, house arrest, isolation in Utah, more albums, federal problems, prison, release, a presidential pardon, a massive tour, a frightening revelation about his heart, and then South Korea, all before 27. Most people would need several lifetimes to experience the amount of change YoungBoy has experienced before reaching his late 20s. And maybe that's exactly why retirement doesn't sound as crazy coming from him as it initially seems. YoungBoy has already lived at a pace most people couldn't sustain. He has produced a catalog that would be enormous for somebody twice his age. He has achieved financial success that gives him options most artists never receive. He has experienced the consequences of living constantly under pressure. And now his own body appears to have given him another reason to reconsider the pace. So maybe South Korea isn't YoungBoy running away. Maybe it's YoungBoy finally realizing that having the ability to leave is its own form of success. Because after everything he spent his first 26 years chasing, money, success, freedom, recognition, survival, he may have reached the point where the thing he values most is something much simpler. And now, at 26, he is living in South Korea, exploring Seoul's luxury neighborhoods, talking about one final tour, building technology to connect directly with his audience, describing a country on the other side of the world as safe and peaceful, and doing all of it with the quiet confidence of someone who has finally made a decision for himself. The contrast between where he was and where he is right now is the heart of why this story resonates so deeply. There was a time when his entire world was defined by the geographic boundaries of his house arrest. He could not leave. He could not tour. He could not move freely. His world was a ranch in Utah and a set of legal conditions that governed almost every aspect of his daily life. And now that same man is in South Korea. He has been to Paris. Reports place him bouncing through Beijing, Norway, Belgium, and France. He is living a version of freedom that is almost the exact opposite of everything he experienced during those years of restriction. The world got very small for him for a very long time, and now it is enormous. But here is the detail that makes this whole story even more layered, and it is something a lot of people have pointed out online. South Korea has some of the strictest drug laws in the entire world. We are not talking about minor consequences. In South Korea, authorities can prosecute individuals for certain drug offenses connected to conduct outside the country under circumstances covered by Korean law. For an artist with YoungBoy's publicly documented history surrounding substances, choosing to spend significant time in a country with that kind of legal framework represents a massive lifestyle adjustment, and that contrast is impossible to ignore. This is somebody whose music spent years openly referencing drugs and the lifestyle surrounding them. Now he is attempting to establish a completely different existence in an environment where those same behaviors could create extremely serious consequences. Whether that played any role whatsoever in YoungBoy choosing South Korea is something only he knows. But from the outside, it adds another dimension to the reset we appear to be watching. Because everything about his current life seems to be pulling him away from the environment that created the old version of NBA YoungBoy. Different country, different surroundings, different priorities, different pace, and potentially a completely different future. So what does that future actually look like? Based on everything YoungBoy has publicly discussed, music is not necessarily disappearing tomorrow. He has talked about having another 1 or 2 albums in him and potentially doing one final tour. At the same time, he appears interested in exploring opportunities outside the traditional recording and touring cycle, including digital ventures like Urban Link 360. That matters because retirement for YoungBoy does not have to mean disappearing. He has already built the audience. He has already built the catalog. He has already built the name. The question now is what he chooses to do with all of it. Imagine YoungBoy 5 years from now. Maybe he is not releasing 4 projects every year. Maybe he is not spending months crossing America on tour buses. Maybe every headline attached to his name is not connected to another court appearance or controversy. Maybe he releases music when he actually wants to. Maybe he operates businesses. Maybe he spends more time traveling. Maybe he builds something that gives him direct ownership over the relationship he has spent years creating with millions of fans. And maybe, for the first time since he was a teenager, his entire identity does not have to revolve around surviving whatever happens next. That possibility is what makes South Korea much more important than simply another celebrity relocation story. Because think about the trajectory here. Baton Rouge gave YoungBoy his identity. Music gave him an escape. Success gave him money. But money did not immediately give him freedom. For years, he had more money than most people could imagine, while simultaneously having less freedom than almost everybody watching him. He could buy almost anything, but he couldn't simply decide where he wanted to go. He could generate hundreds of millions of streams, but he couldn't freely tour. He could own expensive cars that he couldn't drive wherever he wanted. He could live on an enormous property while legally being unable to leave it whenever he chose. That is a strange kind of success, and it helps explain why something as simple as being able to wake up in Seoul, walk outside, travel somewhere else, get on an international flight, experience another country, and decide where tomorrow happens might mean more to YoungBoy than another platinum plaque ever could. Freedom feels different when you've experienced the opposite, and that might also explain why his answer about America sounded so final. There is nothing there for me anymore. That statement says more than simply preferring one country over another. It sounds like somebody separating himself from an entire chapter of his identity. The arrests, the courtrooms, the house arrest, the pressure, the expectations, the constant conflict, the feeling that wherever YoungBoy went, some piece of his history followed him into the room. Moving thousands of miles away does not erase any of that. But distance can change your relationship with it. And Seoul gives him distance. Not invisibility, not complete privacy, not immunity from his past. Distance. Enough distance, potentially, to decide what he actually wants his future to look like without constantly standing inside the environment that shaped his past. Then there is the health situation, and that may ultimately matter more than everything else in this story. YoungBoy revealed that he continued performing after being told something was wrong with his heart. Think about the mentality required to do that. Night after night, city after city, thousands of people screaming your lyrics, your team moving around you, everyone expecting the show, and internally, you know something serious enough has happened that a doctor is talking to you about your heart. Yet you continue. That is the YoungBoy mentality his fans have watched for years. Keep going. Whatever happens, keep going. Locked up? Keep recording. House arrest? Keep recording. Legal problems? Keep recording. Personal problems? Keep recording. Health problems? Finish the tour. That mentality helped build one of the most extraordinary catalogs of his generation. But eventually, the same mentality that makes somebody successful can become the thing they have to learn to control. There is strength in pushing through adversity. There is also strength in recognizing when pushing through is no longer the smartest decision. And maybe that is the biggest transformation happening here. YoungBoy does not need to prove that he can survive chaos anymore. He already proved it, over and over again. The next challenge might be proving that he knows how to live without needing chaos around him. That is harder than it sounds. When somebody grows up constantly responding to danger, instability, pressure, and conflict, peace can almost feel unfamiliar. For years, YoungBoy's creativity existed inside that turbulence. Pain became songs, anger became songs, relationships became songs, court cases became songs, isolation became songs. Everything became music. Now imagine removing some of that turbulence. What happens to the artist? Maybe the music changes. Maybe he releases less. Maybe eventually he stops completely. Or maybe having less chaos gives him the opportunity to create from somewhere completely different. Nobody knows yet. YoungBoy probably doesn't know yet either. That is what makes this chapter fascinating. We're watching the transition while it is still happening. And that is what the word insane in the title of this documentary is really pointing toward. It is not simply the luxury. It is not expensive neighborhoods in Seoul. It is not private transportation. It is not international flights. It is not high-end restaurants or designer stores. YoungBoy has been rich for years. None of that is truly surprising. The insane part is the contrast. A rapper whose entire identity was once inseparable from Baton Rouge is now talking about building his future in Asia. A man whose movements were once dictated by court orders is now traveling internationally. An artist famous for releasing music at an almost impossible pace is talking about having only a couple of albums left. Someone who spent years appearing almost impossible to slow down is finally acknowledging that his health and his life may require exactly that. And perhaps the biggest luxury YoungBoy has in South Korea is not anything money can buy. It is choice. For years, circumstances made choices for him. The streets made choices. Courts made choices. Judges made choices. Probation conditions made choices. The industry made demands. Fans demanded music. His own relentless personality demanded that he keep producing. Now he finally appears to be asking a different question. What does Kentrell Gaulden actually want? Not what NBA YoungBoy needs to release. Not what the label needs. Not what the internet wants. Not what keeps everybody talking. What does he want his life to look like when there is nothing forcing him into the next move? Maybe the answer really is Seoul. Maybe South Korea becomes a temporary chapter before somewhere else. Maybe the business ventures become bigger than anybody expects. Maybe retirement lasts 6 months. Maybe it lasts forever. There are still too many unknowns to pretend anybody knows exactly where this ends. But one thing does seem clear from everything YoungBoy has been saying publicly. He does not want to go backward. And after spending most of his life fighting just to reach the next day, perhaps that is the biggest change of all. NBA YoungBoy spent his teenage years trying to escape Baton Rouge. He spent his early 20s trying to escape legal problems. He spent years trying to escape physical restrictions. He spent his career turning pain into enough money and success that someday he could finally control where his life went next. Now he is 26 years old, thousands of miles away from everything that created him, standing inside one of the biggest cities in Asia and looking toward a future that barely resembles his past. For the first time, NBA YoungBoy may not be running toward another album, another tour, another headline, or another fight. He might simply be trying to build a life he actually wants to stay alive long enough to enjoy. And if that is really what is happening in South Korea, then this isn't the end of YoungBoy's story. It might be the first chapter where he finally gets to write it completely on his own terms. So what do y'all think? Is moving to South Korea the smartest decision NBA YoungBoy has ever made? Do you think this new environment could genuinely change his life? Or do you think eventually the lifestyle and pressure that followed him in America will find him again no matter where he goes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into the stories behind hip-hop's biggest names, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Because NBA YoungBoy's American chapter might be closing, but whatever Kentrell Gaulden is building on the other side of the world may only be getting started.